It's running backs day on the Athletic Football Show. We don't always do running backs as a position group heading into the draft as we pick these position-specific shows. But this class, as I've come to understand it, as I've been told, is a group where we needed to dive headfirst into the running backs. Two people here to help me do that today. First off, it is my co-host here at the Athletic Football Show, Derrik Klassen. Derrik, how you feeling, man?
I'm doing fantastic. This was a little bit of a throwback for me in the sense of, when I was with Bleacher Report, I did all skill players. And so for me to jump all the way in, dozen guys deep back into the running back class, it's what I've been used to.
Also joining us today, it is our draft expert here at The Athletic. It's Dane Brugler. Dane, we had to do the running backs this year. I think you were one of the ones pushing this. Why this year with the running backs?
It's just such a deep group. And obviously, you've got a headliner with Ashton Jeanty at the top. Everybody knows about Jeanty. But it's a fascinating argument of the running back discussion about whether or not to draft Jeanty top 10 is the fact that it's such a deep group that you're looking at the second round, third round, fourth round, deep into day three and thinking, hey, I feel great about our options later on where we don't have to push all the chips in on this one running back early, which further complicates the Jeanty discussion, which we'll talk about. But yeah, it's just such a deep group. I've got draftable grades on 30 running backs. And even then, I mean, I could have
Where
easily.
does that sit for you compared to like a typical year, just for context?
I mean, it's probably around 25.
Okay.
Usually every draft's different, but usually the average is probably around 25-ish. This year it was in the 30s. I had to cut it off. I mean, I could have gone to 32, 33. But not every team's going to draft a running back. So, some of these guys are going to go much later than where I have them ranked, where people think they should go just because the sheer volume of guys.
You have 9 running backs in your top 100. That feels really high compared to a given year. I mean,
No
those
doubt.
are aggressive grades. And I think you have some guys a little bit higher than others. Like RJ Harvey is a guy that we're going to talk about that's not on the consensus board, but you have in your top 100. So 9 running backs going in the first 3 rounds. That feels like a pretty drastic outlier compared to what we're used to, especially in recent years.
I think it sums up this class. And then, okay, you have those 9, and then I have fourth round grades on like 8 more guys.
Jesus.
I mean, it's it's hard to, like, they're not all going to go that high, but I just didn't feel right putting a 5th round grade on Devin Neal or, Ollie Gordon. So yeah, it's a weird group where we're going to have higher grades than ultimately where these guys are drafted, but I don't know. You can't change your grade because you just have too many guys, right? Like that's just, you have to stay true to the scouting. And just because you already have 4 fourth round grades, you can't cap yourself. If he's a 4th round grade, give the guy his due and put him where you think it belongs.
The big board numbers that we're going to list off here are the numbers from the final big board in the final version of the Beast that is going to be available to people when, Dane Brugler?
Wednesday, the 9th. That's we're we're editing right now, doing final edits, just trying to get T's crossed, the I's dotted, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, if everything goes to plan, which we're on pace to do so, it'll be available PDF form and really cool digital form this year. It's really interactive, and we've really put a lot of resources into it this year. So the 9th, first thing that morning, it should be available.
Please be on the lookout for that. If you do not read The Beast every year, I don't know why you're listening to this show or vice versa. It seems like the overlap there and the Venn diagram is just one big circle. So please be on the lookout for that over the next week. I'm not sure how Dane is conscious right now, but we're going to take advantage of it. As we dig into these position-specific shows, we're going to do them all in like kind of superlative style. We're going to do a bunch of categories for each of these positions. I feel like that was the best way to do it, more than a ranking, just because it allows us to hit the breadth of these groups, especially with some of these teams that are some of these positions where the guys maybe outside of the top 10 are interesting. So you don't want to miss out on them by ranking top 10 guys. So that's kind of how we've thought about this. But we are going to start at the top of this class, and we are going to start with the prize of this running back group. I think a pretty consensus, and that is Ashton Jeanty from Boise State, who is 4th in Dane's top 100. Derrik, I'm going to let you kick this off because me and Dane have talked about Jeanty a little bit in passing over the last month or so as we've talked more big picture about this class. When you watched Ashton Jeanty, did his tape line up with what you had heard about him as a prospect?
I would say like 99% yes. Like he is
I sense a little hesitation in there, which I'm excited to dig into.
Well, I think he's fantastic, and like I would put a top 10 grade on him. I think he's incredible. What is mildly interesting to me is that usually when we have these running backs that you are willing to take in the top 10, they usually have excellent long speed. Typically, it's not always the case, but that's usually the case that these guys are home run hitters. It's your Saquon Barkleys, your Todd Gurley's, stuff like that. And I don't think Jeanty's slow by any means, but he doesn't, to me, have that elite breakaway speed. He has like really good, like, second and third gear, but him getting up to that fifth gear isn't like super exciting to me. But I don't think that necessarily precludes him from being an elite prospect. Like, I don't think Bijan Robinson had that either, and he was still a prospect.
That's the name I was going to bring up.
Yeah.
I don't think Bijan was really considered that way, but at least we had numbers on Bijan, Dane.
Mm-hmm.
So Bijan had an 82nd percentile 10-yard split, 4.46 in the 40. We have no numbers on Jeanty. So if you believe in some of the athleticism, then it's more of an inherent trust than it is based on anything concrete that we can look at.
Well, I mean, here's the numbers that we have. 5 touchdowns of 70-plus yards this year. The only other player to do that was LaDainian Tomlinson. So we've got numbers like that. Or how about he had 12 carries of 50-plus yards this year. No other FBS running back or no other FBS player had more than 5. 12, 5. Big gap there. So we don't have the 40. And I agree with Derrik. I don't think he's... And that's why he didn't run, is because he wasn't going to run a 4.40. He's probably going to be, 4.48, 4.51, something like that. And I don't care. Like, to me, it doesn't really matter. I don't blame him for not working out. He's already running back 1. If he worked out and ran a 4.42, all of a sudden the Giants at 3 going to be like, oh, you know what? Maybe we should draft it. No. I mean, it's not going to change anything. So he can only really hurt himself if he worked out, if he did the testing. Because his workout, talking to scouts that were in Boise State for his pro day, they just gushed. I mean, they said the one guy was, I wish we had a top 10 pick so we could draft him, because he's not getting out of the top 10. I mean, they just gushed about the pro day workout, the way he caught the football, and then the person that he is. Like, that's a we don't necessarily dive into that too much. I mean, we stick to the film and the numbers and all that, but the coaches rave about him. They say he's got a halo on under his helmet. Like the ego doesn't get too big, for him. Like, he was raised in a military family, so he's kind of got that buttoned up, disciplined style to
Aaron
him.
Jones.
Just that personality. Yeah, right, exactly. And it's fun with Jeanty because he actually, some of his formative years learning football were in Italy. He would travel because they were on a base over there, and so he went to Naples Middle School, and they would travel to bases in Germany and Belgium and throughout Europe to face other football teams from other bases, which was really cool. When you kind of learn about his background and all that kind of stuff. So, and then like you learn, okay, in high school he went to Lone Star High School in Frisco. He was on the same team with Marvin Mims. There was a couple other guys on that team, but he was a defensive lineman as a sophomore when he got there, because that's where they needed a spot for somebody. And then, so he wasn't even a true running back until later on. And so, yeah, it's fun to learn more and more about, it was fun to learn more about Jeanty throughout the process. But yeah, this is one of the best players in the draft. And I think it makes it really interesting when you're talking about the teams in the top 10 and which ones are going to seriously consider him.
Derrik, if long speed isn't the superpower, but we can concede that he is a top 10 prospect and a special prospect, what are the superpowers when you're watching Ashton Jeanty play beyond some of those numbers that Dane listed off?
His balance is rare. Like, it is really, really special. Just the way that he can, it's not just that he can take a hit and stay on his feet. It's kind of the way that he can bend his body and contort the way that he's absorbing a hit. And so instead of taking 100% of what the hit the linebacker is delivering, he's only taking like 70%. And this is a weird comparison, but we say this a lot with like Lamar Jackson, where he just has this weird way of like getting out of contact. Jeanty has that, but also if he needs to run through your face mask, he can do that. So I think you add that, like his just incredible balance, on top of the fact that I think his footwork and his vision are fantastic. Like it is almost, it's almost like he's not like Bijan necessarily, but like Bijan's superpowers to me are footwork, vision, and balance. And I think Jeanty is a little bit more maybe rugged and violent, but I think he shares a lot of the same qualities. And so those to me are why you would buy in on Jeanty.
Is that where you sit too, Dane? Like, what in your mind, what makes him truly special?
I mean, he runs like he's just got Vaseline doused on his body. Like it's good luck trying to get him on the ground. And I during the season when kind of praising Jeanty, had some people, like, well, he's 5'8", like that's too short for a running back. It's part of what makes him who he is, because he is built so low to the ground that it helps his balance. It helps him bounce off tacklers. He's very instinctive, like what Derrik was saying. Like he doesn't predetermine his path. His reactionary reads are just outstanding. So it's not like he's going to pick where he's going based off of how the linebacker reacts, based off of what the blocking what's going on with the blocking. He can sort, cut, create. That contact balance and that contact is something that really stands out. I was talking to Jeffrey Bassa, the linebacker from Oregon, who has a chance to be a top 100 guy, and he faced Jeanty and also the two Ohio State running backs this year. And he faced the Ohio State running backs twice. And so I asked him plain and simple, like, who was the toughest running back that you had to tackle this year? And before I could even get the question out, he's Jeanty. I mean, plain and simple.
That Oregon game was insane.
Yeah, exactly. When that's the thing is that if there's going to be one true knock against him, is he did it in the Mountain West. And yes, he does have the Oregon game on film where he just demolished that defense. But for the most part, he was like, his Washington State tape was maybe the greatest running back tape I've watched since I've started doing this. And that sounds hyperbolic, but since I started scouting, the last 20 years, might be the single best running back tape that I've ever watched. It was that impressive. But Washington State also had a JV defense this year. So, I think some of the numbers are, because he faced some inferior competition, but he did enough consistently week in, week out especially against a team like Oregon. The Penn State game, he didn't, yards per carry weren't great, but you watch him and he maximized every single touch that he had. I think one of the other concerns, the fumbling for me. I mean, the last 2 years, 9 fumbles for this past year. And he actually had one more that was called back due to penalty. So we don't even count that one. So ball security, that is something that needs to get better as he goes to the next level.
Derrik, when I watched him, the thing that really jumped out to me, I think you and I talked about this a little bit, or it might have been with DK. All this stuff is starting to run together now. But watching him like press the hole and set up blocks or play with linebackers and understand how to pace stuff. With Bijan, I think it's a little bit biased because I've watched so many zone runs with Bijan over the last couple of years that I think of Bijan's patience in kind of a zone bucket. And with Jeanty, he actually had more gap runs than zone runs last year. And a lot of the ones that I'm watching, they're duo type runs where he really is setting stuff up by putting his blockers in the right position. And I think that to me is the best argument, Derrik, about why he's worth this sort of pick, is that he feels like the type of running back that will make the rushing ecosystem around him better. And that's the difficult part. And I think that's why you can argue against taking running backs high most of the time, because so much is dependent on what's around them. I think the type of back that he is, you can make a really serious argument that he would make the players around him better in a way that a lot of running backs aren't able to do.
Outside of his balance, his ability to set up blocks is probably the thing I wrote most in my notes. And it's not just, like you said, with Bijan Robinson, it's mostly zone stuff. And I think he can and has shown that he can do other stuff. Well, with Jeanty, it's both. He can do all the zone stuff. He can show very, very good patience there. He knows when to make his cuts. He can get himself low to the ground and coil and explode very well. But when he's doing all these, running behind a puller in power or counter or duo, he has this incredible ability to make linebackers draw themselves to one side of the offensive lineman before
make
cutting
themselves
the other
wrong.
way. It's make themselves wrong. And it's really, really hard to be this good at it. But the closest in terms of when I watch what it feels like is Le'Veon Bell at his peak. Because they were doing a lot of the counter duo type stuff out of the gun, especially when he was there. And people were like, man, they're just moving so slow. It's going so slow. But when it looks really good, it's because the linebackers don't want to come up and make a decision because they know Jeanty's or a guy like Le'Veon Bell is going to make them wrong. You see that a lot on Jeanty's tape. It's incredibly impressive.
He had 152 missed forced tackles last year per PFF, Dane. That was 49 more than any other player in the class. Number two was 103. He also ran the ball 81 times, more than any other running back in FBS last year. And outside of maybe some long speed concerns and some quality of competition concerns, that'd be the other thing I would throw out to you, Dane. Or would you be a little bit worried if you were taking him with, I don't know, hypothetically, let's say the 10th pick in the draft. Let's say you were taking him there. Would you be a little bit worried that he had 375 carries last year and has 750 carries in his college career?
Yeah, 830 touches on offense over 3 years. That's a lot. That is a lot of mileage, and it's part of your evaluation. I think it's worth talking about. It's worth bringing up. It's definitely a data point, but it would not stop me from drafting him. And, he did get banged up a little bit. He had a knee sprain last year, or in 2023. I think he just missed one game. This past year, he hurt his elbow. He wore this big, bulky brace over really the second half of the season. So, he's been banged up here and there. But for the most part, he didn't miss a beat. Like, he looked like the same guy week in, week out. It would not stop me from drafting. It would not stop me from drafting him based off of where I thought his talent says he should be drafted. But yeah, and I agree with I think what you said earlier is kind of perfect for him in terms of just, he makes everybody around you better. He makes the blocking better. He makes the offense better. That was kind of one of the reasons I really loved Jahmyr Gibbs coming out, is because, yeah, the speed was great, but he knew the timing to hit the hole. He knew, like, he was so good with the blocking geometry that, he just, the way he would read it, hit it, and go, it was just, good luck. And with Jeanty, he doesn't have that type of speed, but he has a feel for when to hit the hole, set up defenders, and just, like you said, make guys wrong. And he does it consistently. So, and I think the thing he doesn't get enough credit for, it kind of reminds me of, like, last year when Drake May was not getting enough credit for being athletic in terms of being a mobile quarterback. Jeanty is one of the best, if not the best. I would say he is the best pass catching back in this class. That is where you're going to hear like LaDainian Tomlinson comps. I think it makes sense partly because he's so good catching the ball out of the backfield. You could use him as an extra receiver. I mean, he can line up in the slot and really be a dynamic weapon for you. He's a smaller target, but he can catch the ball outside his frame consistently. And they didn't allow him to do it that much this year just because they didn't need him to, but that is a big part of his game.
There's a coach picking in the top 10 that was familiar with Jahmyr Gibbs in the draft process.
Yeah.
But do you know
I wonder.
Just throwing it out there.
Does he get there?
That might be the better question.
So that was my next question for you guys, is where would you like to see him go? If there was an ideal landing spot for you, Derrik, in the range of the draft that makes sense, what would you say it is?
I mean, not to make you happy here, but like, I probably is Chicago. I think that probably is the best.
I'm not sure it makes me happy. I still have enough reservations about
it.
Really?
You're conflicted.
I'm definitely conflicted.
But is that purely a value thing, or is that just like any reservations about the player?
It's more about the value. It's honestly just like it's a real deep concern with eating your vegetables first. And the fact that it's still hard for me to believe this team has eaten its vegetables to the proper extent that it deserves dessert. Like, I'm just not sure we're at that point yet. But after watching him, sometimes you just need to spring for dessert. Like, sometimes that's just how it works. You can eat ice cream for dinner. Like, there's nothing preventing you from doing that. We're all adults.
I'll actually say too, I don't want it to be the Raiders. I think their offensive line as a run blocking unit is like really overrated. And I know we just said that he could make them better, but I don't want him thrust into like a Todd Gurley 2015 situation where his rookie year is just head running into a wall. I don't want that. I want him on an offensive line that has been built perhaps like Chicago's.
Not as worried about the Raiders situation. I feel like the offensive ecosystem last year was so bad. And you have year two now. You have some young guys that are going to be in year two. You have young guys that are going to be in year two. I trust Chip Kelly more than I trust that previous staff. You might be right, Derrik. I'm not willing to lump in what the Raiders were last year running the ball into what I think they might be this year. That's why I'm a little bit more open to it at 6, even if I think it's probably sequentially might be more of an issue in terms of how you're building and when.
Let me ask you guys, all right, the hypothetical here. Let's say Ashton Jeanty he's a top 10 pick, but he doesn't go 6 to the Raiders and he doesn't go 10 to the Bears. What other team? It feels like there's a surprise team in there that maybe we're not talking about a lot that could say, you know what, screw it. Ashton Jeanty is the best player on the board. Like, what are we doing? Let's take the best player. I think if you have a 1A running back and a 1A pass rusher, you're taking the pass rusher every time. But if you have a 1A running back and a 1B pass rusher, you know what? Let's take the best player. Take the Raiders and the Bears out of consideration. What other team in the top 10 could you think, hey, this could be a sneaky landing spot for Jeanty?
I have two that I would say. I don't know where Derrik sits with this.
It's just so hard because a lot of them are kind of committed to backs. Like, I think if New Orleans wanted a better contingency plan or like a surefire contingency for Kamara, who they're actually pretty similar players, him and Jeanty, so I think that would make a lot of sense for them. I think with who else might be on the board for Jacksonville, I don't know if it would be the best idea, but I kind of love the idea of him and Cohen's offense.
That was the one I would throw out. I think New Orleans has to be in there just because Kamara's getting a little bit older. Financially, they're committed to him for probably the next 2 years, but I don't think that should prevent you from doing it necessarily. With Jacksonville, I don't know. I think that Etienne's on his way out. Bigsby was fine last year in stretches. I don't think any of that with a new staff and a new front office is preventing me from taking that guy if I think he's the best player available right there.
And that's the thing. Now that I'm thinking about it, there's absolutely a world where Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter are off the board by that point. Maybe that is just the best player on the board is Ashton Jeanty. Like, maybe go take that swing.
And what about the Patriots? As just you know what? Let's say one quarterback goes in the top 3. So Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter go 2 and 3. So you are basically an offensive tackle or the best player on the board, which is Jeanty. I think I don't know, could be interesting.
In the world where you can tell me for sure they get a tackle with their next pick, I don't think it's that crazy. I don't think it's that crazy.
It's so hard for me to justify that given the state of their offensive line and their receiving core, but I get it. If only one quarterback goes and both Carter and Hunter are off the board, then I think you could probably make an argument for it. I'm not sure it's as strong of an argument as it might be for teams picking a little bit later in the top 10.
It's just such a hard year for this because, again, we have 4 or 5 blue chippers, maybe not even that much, and it's just then there's a little bit of a drop off, and I think every team's going to look at that drop off a little bit differently. Where it's like, you know what, we're fine shopping in tier 2 and passing on a running back in tier 1, where other teams might just say, you know what are we doing? Let's take the better player and let the chips fall where they may. But yeah, I think that it would be interesting. And to answer your original question about where we want to see or the best fit for Jeanty, Sean Payton trading up into the top 10. Make it happen, splash. To me, I would love to see that fit and to see how that would work with that offense, with that quarterback. I think that'd be a lot of fun.
If you're a team like Carolina and you think that from 8 to 20, the talent flattens a little bit, you need pieces. You have a second round pick, but it's not yours. You're trading that pick away to the Bears. You could probably use some more picks. That's a team I would probably be calling if I were the Broncos, because I think that's the team you could probably convince to trade out of that spot. There are toolsy defensive prospects available there, Dane, but I think that there aren't there are complete defensive prospects available there, or maybe you can get a similar tier of guy at 20 that you could get at 8. With teams picking ahead of that, the Jets, I think the tackles that could be there, maybe it scares them off, but Carolina would be a fun one.
Yeah, I think that makes total sense, and I think they'll be open for business, again, to add more draft picks and just add more draft capital where, Sean Payton's always ready to strike if he sees an opportunity. So I don't know. That one, the chances of that happening are, I think, pretty low, but that would just be one that would, I think, make a ton of sense if the opportunity's there.
Before we get back into the show, I want to tell you about the Athletics listener survey. You listen to us, now we want to hear from you. We're asking you to fill out a quick survey about you and your podcast habits by going to theathletic.com/athletic/survey25. 3 lucky entries will win $100 worth of Amazon vouchers. So whether you're a longtime listener or a new one, we want your feedback. Go to theathletic.com/athletic/survey25. That's theathletic.com/athletic/survey25. The link is also in our episode description below. All right, let's talk about the guys beyond Ashton Jeanty in this group. I wanted to have a category that was just the consolation prize, right? If you do not get Jeanty, this is the next back that you want. And I feel like a consensus has started to form here, Dane, about who that back is. And it's typically been, in a lot of people's minds, Omarion Hampton from North Carolina. It feels like as teams are talking about, or people are talking about who might miss out on Jeanty, Hampton, even as high as 12 to the Cowboys, feels like there's a little bit of just buzz on that when it comes to mock drafts and people just playing around. When you look at the second best back in this class, is Hampton clearly that guy for you, or do you think that it's at least a conversation with him and some of the other guys that are going to be available?
I think it's a conversation. I like Hampton a lot. He is my number 2 running back. But if I ran strictly outside zone, and I that's the type of running back I wanted, Kaleb Johnson from Iowa would absolutely be part of that conversation, because that's where he got his master's degree, is outside zone. He's just so adept at it. I think with Hampton, he can do gap or zone. I think he'd be fine whatever blocking scheme you're running. But he also has a lot of the physical traits that you want. I mean, he's thick, square build. He's got speed. He's got run strength. He can really tilt the field with that forward lean, so he's going to barrel through tacklers. And his burst for a 220-pound athlete is really, really impressive. But he's another guy that has some of the running back specific traits to him as well, in terms of his ability to read blocks, set up defenders. He can cut back. He's really strong off his plant foot, so speed in and out of his cuts. And he can catch the ball in the backfield. So those pivot routes that they ran at North Carolina over and over and over again. And I think the best compliment that you could pay to Omarion Hampton is just the fact that, like last year, he ran for over 1,400 yards with Drake May as his quarterback. This year, where it was basically the Omarion Hampton show and nobody else, he still ran for over 1,400 yards. It was still productive, even though the passing game was not there. So all-purpose yards, rushing yards, didn't matter what was going on around him, quarterback, offensive line, he was able to produce. So not the most creative back, but I think he's just, in terms of the mix of bruising and speed and vision, I think he has a lot of that.
A lot of explosiveness. If you look at the jumps, 91st and 98th percentile in both of those categories. He was 6th nationally in missed tackles forced last season among every back in FBS with that physical profile. Derrik, what does the gap look like for you with Hampton and everybody else? Because I know he's your number 2 guy as well.
I would say it's like a half a tier. And the next guy for me is also Kaleb Johnson. And I think, kind of like Dane said, it comes down to, if you know you are running a strictly outside zone type of offense like what the Falcons were doing, yeah, I'd probably rather have Johnson. But in a more general sense, I think I would rather have Hampton. I think Hampton, for me, just checks so many boxes. Like, this is a lofty comp, but when I watch him, I see a lot of the same things that made Nick Chubb like one of the best running backs in the league, where it's just his balance, his patience for a guy his size, his burst when he gets into the open field. He's a bigger, thicker guy, but he has a pretty impressive ability to like get lower and coil himself and really like be flexible and get to a different angle. Like, he's just a very, very impressive runner. My biggest issue watching his tape wasn't even his fault. It was just that almost all of their run concepts were, he is like hip to hip standing with the quarterback pre-snap, and he's like shuffling into the carry instead of being able to just get downhill and go. And I would love to see like what it really looks like when he gets more carries, where right out of his stance, boom, he can just go. Like, I would just love to see what it looks like. So I almost think there's actually a little bit of still untapped potential with a player like this. And then the last 2 things is, I think he's a fairly comfortable pass catcher, probably not as good as Jeanty, but I think it's something he can do. And he's a damn good pass blocker. Like, he's just a guy who, I think when you're drafting a player in the first round at the running back position, it has to be a guy I can put out there for 60 snaps, and I know that he can give me value no matter what the down and distance is, and I think Hampton absolutely does that.
How high would you draft Omarion Hampton, Dane?
Somewhere in the late first round. I think, like, if I'm Denver and, I'm looking at my team and who's available, like, Hampton's 29 on my board, but for a team like Denver, you know what? That makes sense. Let's think about how that could help transform our offense. Is a running back like this, you drop him in, and he's one thing I really appreciated about that North Carolina offense was they demand their running backs to pass protect. Like Derrik was saying, and so I know I have a good idea with what I'm getting with Omarion Hampton running the ball, catching the ball, and then as a blocker. So he's an any down type of player, and you can nitpick him for sure, but I don't think there's one glaring weakness to his game that would stop me from drafting him somewhere in the back half of round 1.
You had Kaleb Johnson ahead of him for a little bit during this process, Dane. I think you were a bigger Kaleb Johnson fan than the consensus had been really up until his pro day where the testing wasn't great. Is that ultimately what caused you to push Hampton a little bit ahead of him and drop Johnson down a tiny bit?
Not just I had them neck and neck, like in my top 100 board before the combine. Tags were touching. They were, right next to each other. So I think just the fact that, with Kaleb, his pro day wasn't great. A lot of drop passes. He was 10 pounds heavier than what he was at the combine, which is a little bit of a red flag. And there was just enough there that it's like, okay, Omarion Hampton, I'm going to, from a general point of view, because we're not drafting or we're not ranking these guys for a specific scheme. We're just doing it from a general point of view. But I really do like Kaleb Johnson. He's so physically put together. But he kind of reminded me of DeMarco Murray a little bit with the way he runs.
That's perfect.
Yeah, I mean, the way he can process those backside cuts, he can follow blocks, really shines on toss and outside zone and any type of horizontal flow type of plays. The long speed's not great, but it's good enough where he's going to get that initial acceleration and he can take you a long way. He doesn't fumble, caught the ball well in games. So there's enough there that, I think he's in that conversation to be if he's not one of the first 2 running backs off the board, he should be 3rd or 4th, just depending on the type of runner that you want.
Hampton at 20, the Broncos, I think, makes a ton of sense. I'm wondering where Johnson makes sense, because you look at the teams that ran the most zone runs in the league last year, they're pretty squared away running back wise. One of those teams employs Bijan Robinson. Another one of them employs Saquon Barkley. Another one is Jahmyr Gibbs. The team that actually makes sense when it comes to running back need and the scheme that they're running, they don't have a pick in the range where they would take him, Derrik. To me, it's the Steelers. Like him in that offense in Pittsburgh actually does make a lot of sense. I don't think they're taking him in the first round for reasons. I'm not sure they could justify another running back in the 20s considering what has happened recently and some of the needs that they have. In the second round, though, if they had a pick, that would make sense to me. Unfortunately, they do not have a pick in the second round. So a team where he actually makes sense is a little bit harder for me to land on than somebody like Hampton, who feels like he's a little bit more scheme diverse.
It is a little bit trickier to find, especially compared to 5 years ago when everyone was running a little bit more of the outside zone stuff. Like even some of the traditional outside zone guys are doing less of that now. Shanahan's doing less of it. Even Kevin O'Connell, we don't know exactly what the offense is going to look like next year, but with the moves that they made along the interior offensive line suggests to me they want to be a little bit more power, pulling gaps a little bit. So
well, it's another team I would throw out. But they
still do think
only have the
sense.
first round pick. They traded for Jordan Mason, and they don't have any other picks aside from the first round pick. So teams that would make sense for me to draft Kaleb Johnson in the second round, neither of them has a second round draft pick.
Could you see him in Ben Johnson's offense?
Sure. And I think that's the other one that I would throw out. And we'll get to that in a second. I think that there's a lot of these guys in this conversation about if you don't draft Ashton Jeanty in the top 10, who will you draft in the second round? And so I think that there's plenty of guys we can get to there. But if they do decide to pass on Jeanty, I do think that there is a world where he would make sense for them, yes.
I think that, and look, he's an Ohio guy, played it in Iowa, like Chicago. I mean, he's kind of built for that. And kind of like I was saying with Omarion Hampton, without Drake May, and he was still productive, Iowa ranked 130th out of 133 teams this year in passing offense. Okay, I mean, stacked boxes after stacked boxes. Everyone knew what was happening with that Iowa offense, and yet still productive, still rushed for almost 1,600 yards. He set all types of Iowa records. So, yeah, I mean, he's just, the more you watched him, I think the more you appreciated what Kaleb Johnson did this year for Iowa.
Looking at some of the numbers, he ran a 4.58 40. 1.6 10-yard split, which is like in the 60th percentile. It's not great, but his play speed seems to outpace that. He had 28 runs of 15 plus yards this year, which was 3rd in FBS. So even if the numbers don't necessarily say it, Dane, he has shown an ability to be at least a doubles hitter, if not a home run hitter, pretty consistently in that offense.
Yeah, and he was number 2 with 21 carries of 20-plus yards. So, I mean, he is a guy that found his yardage. Again, a lot of stacked boxes, but if he could clear that first wave, and he was very good at reading, setting up blocks, anticipating those backside, front side lanes. So he's going to find yardage if it's there. And he did it very, very consistently. So that's where I think the DeMarco Murray comp comes in, where it's a play style. It's, he's a 3-down player, patient, powerful, one cut, instinctive vision, really going to take advantage of those run angles. And as an athlete, he's kind of a glider. Maybe not a true burst guy, maybe not a true speed guy, but has some gliding to him with the way he runs the ball. So I think it's easy to appreciate the way he runs a rock.
So let's get to that top half of the second round and what that might look like based on the running backs who might go a little bit earlier. In this hypothetical, let's just say that Ashton Jeanty goes in the top 10 to one of those teams we discussed that maybe was a little bit of a surprise. Let's say he goes to Jacksonville at 5, and then let's say Hampton goes to the Broncos at 20. And in this hypothetical, let's say Kaleb Johnson goes to the Bears at 40. Where are their picks in the second round? 39, 41. So let's say he goes and one of those 2 picks is spent on Kaleb Johnson. The Bears draft Will Campbell at 10. So now we have the Raiders and the Cowboys, both that need running backs that have high second round picks. Are there any other guys in this range, Dane, that you think would make sense for those teams? Or do you feel like this range of the draft combined with who'd be left, there's not really a dance partner in that area?
TreVeyon Henderson, I think both these Ohio State running backs, I think will be in that conversation. TreVeyon Henderson, Quinshon Judkins, 2 different types of backs. And TreVeyon Henderson, going back to his freshman year, I remember 2021 watching him and Bijan Robinson, and I tweeted at the time, the 2 best running back prospects in college football, neither are draft eligible. This is Bijan, who was a sophomore at Texas at the time, and then TreVeyon, who was a freshman at Ohio State. And obviously Bijan turned out to be a top 10 pick. TreVeyon Henderson, he was so good as a freshman, and then sophomore year he was hurt. Junior year hurt as well, a little bit better. This past year, you bring in a guy like Quinshon Judkins to the mix, where it's not all on Henderson, and he stayed healthy, and he had a really productive year. A big part of why they won the national championship. I'm not as high maybe as Henderson as some other people. I really like him. I do think that he's a little tight. I do think that he's at his best when you lead him to the hole, where things can get a little muddy for him sometimes. Because he is a speed guy, you hear Jahmyr Gibbs comparisons a lot, and that's where speed, sure, I get why you're making the comparison, but he's not, in terms of his reading at the line of scrimmage, when he faces some muddy lines, he has a tougher time getting out of it and finding that escape route, where Gibbs can do that. Where with Henderson, it just gets a little murkier. So the patience and tempo, hot and cold at times. But if you give him space, if you give TreVeyon Henderson a lane where he can just roll, he's going to make the defense pay. And he can catch the ball in the backfield. So I like his fit in Dallas quite a bit. I think that makes a lot of sense for both sides.
What do you think of Henderson, Derrik?
I liked him a good amount, but I do agree with Dane. He's not as polished as Jahmyr Gibbs was, which is, why Gibbs was able to go in the top 15, and Henderson is probably a guy who's more in the top 50 range. I think it's funny that Henderson, to me, is kind of caught somewhere between what Detroit was trying to get away from in DeAndre Swift, but it's not quite as far as what they got with a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs. Like, he's a little bit caught between that. I don't think he's quite as runs into the back of his own blockers as a guy like Swift, but I do think when things get muddied for him, he can have some issues. But he's a guy, when I saw him spring into the second level, he has, to me, the most impressive, like, flipping from that second to third gear, where, like, as soon as he decides it's go time, he is just breaking someone's angle and he is completely gone. Like, I think his long speed is really, really impressive. And I also think what kind of really drew me to him, other than that, obviously you love the explosive play potential, but he does some of the other little things, right? Like, I actually think he is a pretty feisty pass protector. There's even some plays where they would be running Will Howard and he's the lead blocker and he's taking somebody out. I love that. And I think he's a fairly comfortable pass catcher. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. There's one where he leads Howard into the end zone doing that. Like,
it was a fumble, but it should have been a touchdown.
Yeah, right. Oh, that's right.
Fumbled
But
at the
I
1 yard
just
line, but yeah, it should have been. Yeah.
right. I guess in my mind I was like, it's it should be, so I just assumed it was.
Oh yeah, no, it was a beautiful block, and he's got blocks all over the Michigan State
incredible.
game, the Indiana game. There's almost every tape. There's something where he's putting a guy on his back. It's not always consistent. I mean, the highlights are great. It's not always consistent, but none of these running backs are, I would say, are consistent in terms of just being pure pass protectors. Few running backs in college are, but he is one of the better pass protecting backs in this class as well. And he doesn't fumble. He catches the ball well. I mean, that screen that he took all the way against Texas right before halftime was just unbelievable. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that, you can have him on the field on first down. You can have him on the field on third down. Like he's not a situational type of back.
Guy, when I was watching him, that he reminded me of a little bit, just because body type wise, they're fairly similar in size. And then he had a sluggo that he ran against Purdue that was like a huge chunk play where he was lined up as the number 1 receiver. And it reminded me of a play that Aaron Jones ran against the Chiefs on Sunday Night Football like 5 years ago. So stylistically, when I was watching him, I was like, I could see a little bit of Aaron Jones to his game. And Aaron Jones is somebody that is not a 25 touch a game guy. Like, that's just not who he is as a running back. Like, he is part of a committee. He is part of a stable of backs within your offense. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, Dane, but it kind of feels like TreVeyon Henderson has to be that sort of player for you.
Yeah, I mean, the comp that I had was like a little bit better version of Chase Brown, like that type of player, like, which is a similar type of guy that we're talking about. But another one who, is Chase Brown a guy that's going to carry the ball 25 times a game? Like, not necessarily.
He was last year, but maybe he shouldn't have been.
Right, exactly.
He was last year by necessity. They tried to trade for who's that back for? Who's the Bears back? Derrik, that I'm forgetting.
Khalil Herbert.
Khalil Herbert.
Yeah.
The Bengals tried to trade for Khalil Herbert, and then he fumbled immediately, and then was banished to the shadow realm for the rest of the season. But they tried to have somebody that they brought in. Dane, this kind of, speaking of that, like the types of backs we're talking about here. If you're the Raiders and you're starting your backfield from scratch in the second round, and you're Chip Kelly, and you know both of these guys, would you rather start your backfield with TreVeyon Henderson or Quitshot Junkins in that spot, considering the skill sets for both?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer here. I mean, that's not to ride the fence, but I think it comes down to you're looking for the more explosive player, which is TreVeyon Henderson. He's got a little more home run ability, maybe not as consistent down to down, but he's going to give you a little bit more juice. And at the end of the day, I can find, a banger between the tackles. Give me the guy that's got a little more juice. So I would lean towards Henderson. That's why he's ranked higher in my rankings. But that's not to say that Quinshon Judkins is a slug. He has the makings to be an every down back as well. So I could understand the argument for either one of these guys.
Judkins is big, Derrik, but he's also a very good athlete. I mean, you look at his testing numbers, 40 was decent, but he is explosive. 38.5-inch vertical, 99th percentile broad jump among running backs. So this is not like a plotter, even though he is more of a big body back that was the innings eater for that Ohio State offense.
And you see it the most at the second level. Like, he's another guy where I don't think his long speed is like that impressive to me, but his burst and his ability to just make these jump cuts for a guy who is his size at the second level is incredibly impressive. And then every now and then when he really wants to, he can just absolutely run through somebody's face. And I know production-wise and like early in the season, he wasn't exactly what people thought he was coming from Ole Miss going to Ohio State. I know they were a little bit up and down early in the season, but when you watch some of his best tape, either at Ole Miss or later in the season at Ohio State, he is just an incredibly violent runner. And so that is where I actually think like the Raiders question is interesting. Henderson, like you mentioned, I think it's harder to find guys who are that explosive, but at the same time, he's always going to have to be part of a committee. I think with Judkins, even though I think he's a lesser player, you can convince me that he can be like a Najee Harris, where he can take 260 carries over the course of a season, and that's completely fine.
Yeah, at this point, I mean, the Raiders don't really have anybody. So the idea of taking Henderson and still needing the guy that can eat some carries for you, I don't even know who that would be. I mean, the free agent running back class is an absolute disaster, and the guys who are left aren't any better. So it's an interesting conversation, and I think that if the Raiders do not take Jeanty at 6, where they land on a running back in this process, Dane, especially considering who their offensive coordinator is probably going to be one of the more interesting conversations we're having on day 2.
No doubt. Double up at running back in this class, or, they could get a PFA in this class and still, I think, feel okay with who they have. But yeah, and with Judkins, we mentioned it with Jeanty. It's fair to mention with Judkins, 800 career touches over his 3 years in college. Just a high amount, even though he did stay durable the last 3 years. No major injuries to speak of. My big issue with Judkins, I think, like when you go to the grocery store when you're hungry and you end up spending more money than you should, like Judkins runs like he's starving. And I think part of this was he was the guy at Ole Miss, and then he comes to Ohio State where he's sharing the carries. And so every time he got on the field, he was so eager to say, I'm going to go make a play. I'm going to go make a play, that he's running into his own blockers. He's not running with patience. I think it got a little bit better towards the end of the year, but just that patience and tempo, I think, are not as maybe not as natural for him as some of these other running backs. I think he can get better and better and better at that, but just not running so aggressively while not losing that violence that he runs with. It's just kind of a fine line with him.
You know who he actually reminded me of for that exact reason? And this is it is kind of one of those things that it's a double-edged sword where, like, you love the violence that he runs with, but also, like, don't run into your own guys. It's a lot like Isaiah Pacheco, and I think Judkins is a better athlete than that. He's a little bit more explosive, but it's a lot of, like, okay, he might grind out a few extra yards running through an arm tackle here and there, but there also might be some plays where we blocked it for 4 and he got 1 because he ran straight into his guard. Like a little bit of that sort of dynamic.
Yeah, not a lot of explosive plays on the Isaiah Pacheco tape. Not a lot of 15-yard runs on the Isaiah Pacheco tape these days, which is kind of why this is not a team we've talked about with this position. But with this group of players, would it shock you, Dane, if the Chiefs just decided, okay, we'll take a running back in the first round? I know the history isn't great there, but if you look at what they currently have, I don't think it's the weirdest argument to make that it might be justifiable in this spot considering the players in this class.
Well, okay, let's say, Jeanty's off the board. I don't think Hampton makes it to the Chiefs in the first round, but if he were on the board, I don't think anybody would be surprised if that was the pick. I would be a little bit surprised if maybe they reached on, I say reach, but if they took TreVeyon Henderson that early in the first, just considering. But you know what? When you're talking about that point in the draft, like, all these guys are very similar in terms of grade, in terms of how you tier them in this class. And so at the end of the first round, nothing would surprise me in this draft, to be honest.
They have more needs. They have bigger needs than that. They still need defensive line help in the worst way. But if the board falls a certain way and they don't think a guy at that position or a couple of the other positions in need are worth taking, it's not something we've talked or thought about a lot. But when you think about their current situation and the range of the draft these guys might go in, I think it's probably worth mentioning. So we've hit the top 5 guys on your big board, Dane. Jeanty was at 4, Hampton at 29, Johnson at 44, Henderson at 46, Judkins at 60. The next few categories here are going to allow us to get a little bit deeper into these classes and get a little bit more specific in the types of guys that we're talking about. Who is the guy in your mind, Dane, where you're just trusting the tape on him? Even if the testing wasn't great, even if there's some questions beyond what he put on film last year, you're going to believe in what you watched.
For me, that's easy. It's Jordan James from Oregon. He's 5'9.5", 208 pounds. The testing wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great. 4.51, 40-yard dash, 1.55, 10, 32-inch vert. 32-inch vert's not great. So I think that the athletic profile is not great, and you see that because he doesn't have a ton of 50-yard, or he doesn't have a ton of huge plays, but he's more of a
12 runs of 15 plus yards, which was a very low number considering he had 230 carries last year.
So, all right, here, this stat is crazy. He ranked 10th in the FBS in carries of 10 plus yards, 39, but he had only 3 of 20 plus yards. So 173rd is what it is. So, I mean, like, we're talking, the amount of singles and doubles. So he's not going to get you a 60-yard run, but he's going to get you a 6-yard run consistently. And so I think that's what I love. I love the ability to okay, he got a little more, 2 more yards than he should have there, 2 more yards than he should have there. And, instead of, where it's inconsistent, every single time he's touching the ball, he's consistently getting and putting you in 2nd and 4 situations, or all of it's 3rd and 2. Like, he's just a guy that moves the ball, and he does it because he runs low to the ground. He's very decisive. There is very little dancing to what he wants to do. Short, stocky, and that strong forward momentum keeps his balance, keeps his legs grinding. He also does a nice job of baiting defenders and then setting up the blocks before he can cut away from the leverage. Works well in tight spaces. He doesn't need a big open area to make his moves. He can work in those tight spaces. So he's just a guy that's consistent. And he averaged, I thought actually last year watching the Oregon offense, he was a better running back than Bucky Irving was, in my opinion. And then this year as the lead back, he ran for almost 1,300 yards, 15 touchdowns. I mean, he was a true lead back for Oregon. So to me, I mean, Jordan James, he's going to go somewhere in the top 4 rounds. Maybe not as high as I have him ranked, but I think, when it's all said and done, Jordan James is going to outplay where he was drafted.
He was remarkably efficient on short yardage plays despite being a somewhat smaller back. Like, that's the type of guy that we're talking about here. Derrik, you're also a big Jordan James fan relatively. I'm looking at teams picking in like outside of the top 75 into the 4th round and just thinking about what team and what offense might need somebody with this sort of skill set where he's an innings eater. He's somebody that's going to have a lot of carries for you. He's a consistent, reliable player, even if he's not that explosive. Is there a team, as you think about it, that might make sense for a player who's bringing what Jordan James is to the table?
I think Cleveland makes a lot of sense. They're picking at 94.
Interesting.
I think that's a really good one. I think Kansas City,
and
if
at
they
104, by the way.
Yeah, and if Kansas City hasn't taken it back by then, I think he could make some sense for them. I know Minnesota.
Jordan James is like the opposite of Jerome Ford in terms of like what type of player he is and what he's bringing to your offense.
That is exactly why they need him. It would be like what Ohio State just had with Judkins and Henderson, where it's like Ford is your explosive, gets all these long plays, but he's just not that efficient of a player. And then you have your innings eater with a guy like Jordan James. I honestly think either San Francisco or Minnesota in that range could make sense for me. I think San Francisco at any point just adding contingency plans for McCaffrey makes some sense. And then with Minnesota,
I can't do it. The Niners cannot draft another running back in the first 4 rounds. I'm not allowing it to happen.
But the other ones,
you're going to take Garendo and you're going to like it.
Well, all the other ones he drafted are like, this guy's an athlete and I'm going to turn him into some superstar, which is what the Garendo pick was. This one would be like, all right, I need to turn back the clock a little bit and just get me a guy who can get us 6 yards, like Dane said. And I think James would actually accomplish that pretty well for them. And then, like I said, Minnesota, I know they traded for Jordan Mason. I think Jordan James is could be as good or better than Mason was last year for the Niners. So,
Derrik, who is your trust the tape guy?
I honestly struggled with this category a little bit, and so I actually figured this was just the best spot to talk about Cam Skattebo.
I love this. This is a man who is learning the content game, knowing that we had to talk about him at some point, so I'm just going to pick him in order to do it here. I very much appreciate you doing this.
I knew it would be a bad show if we didn't talk about Cam Skattebo, so I figured I'd throw him in here. And I think you actually do genuinely have to trust the tape with him because he's not a guy who tested all that well. He jumped okay, but he was a guy who I think ran in the mid 4.6s.
39.5-inch vertical. It's way more than okay.
He ran like a 4.65 at his pro day. So you've got the fast track and you still run a 4. So it's not an ideal time. So I think that's kind of where you get some of the struggles with him. Also, he's an older prospect who, similar to the other guys that we've talked about, just has a lot of mileage already. So those are the reasons that you might struggle with him. But I think when you actually watch him on film, there are some things that you like. I think almost like we talked about with Jeanty, and it's not this good, but he has a kind of bizarre ability to contort his body around contact and make sure that he's minimizing it so that he can, okay, I can take this instead of being brought down right here. I can take this hit and I can stumble forward for 3 yards, or maybe I have a chance to break out of it and go hit another guy. He's a very flexible player for a guy who is a little bit, smaller and thicker. I don't think he's all that explosive. I don't think he's that quick, but if you just need a guy who I think maybe in like the 4th round, 5th round can really just kind of be an innings eater type for you, maybe on 100 and some odd carries on early downs and just kind of be that type of player, I do think that he could probably give you that at a decent clip.
About Jeanty had 153 missed tackles forced. That was number one in the country. Cam Scadaboo had 103. He was the one that was 49 behind Ashton Jeanty. Dane, you relatively are a little bit lower on Cam Scadaboo. He is 77th in the consensus board right now. He is not in your top 100. Where is the gap to you between how other people are seeing him and the way that you look at him as a prospect?
I don't know that. Yeah, there's a huge gap because I put a early 4th round grade on him, so he would make my top 120. Say, he runs with such tremendous resolve. It's fun to watch. Pad level, contact balance, gets the most out of every carry. I mean, if you draft him, you're upgrading your backfield's just physicality and toughness, which you love. And he's also very good as a pass catcher out of the backfield. He's the first running back since McCaffrey to rush for over 1,500 yards and have at least 500 receiving yards in the same season. So this is a guy that has production. He's done it. He's just, the way he runs, it's just gonna be harder to find those yards in the NFL. It's gonna be harder to break those tackles when you're comparing Big 12 defenses to NFL defenses. So I think it's because he breaks tackles a little bit differently than, say, like an Ashton Jeanty, where Genty's got maybe a little more make you miss and, the way that he can squirm out of contact, where Scadaboo's taken on a lot of that contact. And so it's just going to be a little bit tougher to be consistently low man wins and get out of those tackles. So I think he's a good back. I would draft him on day 3. I don't see him as a top 100 guy like some other people do.
Comparison I've seen based on the 40 time and based on the skill set and the strengths he's bringing to the table. David Montgomery has been mentioned a lot, Dane. Do you think that is overly optimistic, or do you think that is a fair comparison for his game? Scadaboo.
I think that's best case. That's if everything turns out the way that it could, there's an avenue where that's where it turns into. He could become a David Montgomery type of back. I don't think that's impossible. But I also think that's best case scenario if we're laying out all the different options that could happen with him. So, and at the same time, it's the value of David Montgomery. If you could have David Montgomery right now, say, would you trade a 3rd round pick for David Montgomery? No, probably not. So, I don't think it's just, even if he is David Montgomery, I don't think that's necessarily a reason to draft him in the 3rd round.
We talked about TreVeyon Henderson, Derrik, as somebody that is a good pass catcher and a good pass protector. Dane made a joke before we started recording that Scadaboo sounds like something that Adam Sandler would say. Watching Cam Scadaboo try to pass protect is like watching Bobby Boucher if he was like 10 drinks in. Like that's what it feels like. There is a lot of scattershot, like big drop the hammer moments that can go either way in terms of what I saw when watching him.
There are, outside of, it's kind of funny. I think the top 2 running backs in this class are really good pass protectors in Jeanty and Hampton. Most of the other guys after that, it's a lot of throwing contact in a weird way or a lot of guessing, and you have no idea where their eyes are supposed to be. So, and Scadaboo, unfortunately, does fall into that category a little bit.
That his eye level and then just the mechanics are they need a lot of work. He's got the body type, he's got the functional strength, but the eye level and just the fundamentals of doing it are just not NFL ready.
Next one here, Derrik, I'll let you kick this one off. Who is the back in this class that you just can't believe isn't getting more love in the process after you went back and watched these guys?
Yeah, so this guy could have honestly fit into the last category for me as well because he didn't run all that well. But to me, it's Kansas running back Devin Neal. When I watched him, relative to expectation and what I was looking at with consensus boards and stuff going in, he was by far my favorite player to watch. I mean, he is, for one, I just love his pace and his footwork and his vision as a runner. He's just a guy who clearly gets it. He sets stuff up well. He's incredibly decisive. You don't really see him doing a whole lot of pitter-pattering his feet behind the line of scrimmage and wasting time. He's just a very mature runner, and I appreciate that about him. And then what I also appreciate is he's just He's a bigger guy. He measured in like 5'11", close to like 215. So he's a pretty rugged runner. And he's just, when you watch him, you absolutely see the lower body strength. Like his ability to, if a defensive end kind of comes off and gets arms on him, he's just able to run right through it and get to the second level. I just really love that about him. He's incredible on the goal line for all of those same reasons. He, to me, kind of reminded me a little bit of like, you remember those handful of really good years from like Jordan Howard? That is kind of what he reminds me of. Just a bigger, rugged,
I sure do.
I'm sure, I know you do, Robert. But he's just like a bigger, rugged, more mature running back who maybe isn't all that explosive, but just brings a lot of that good stuff. And then I actually think he has pretty decent hands. He's not like an explosive pass catcher, but he's comfortable doing it. And so it's another one of those things where it's like, yep, we can just have this guy out there and it's never going to be a problem. So he was just a guy where I see him consistently outside of, like the top 120 and stuff on consensus big boards. And he, to me, is a guy I would absolutely take in the top 100.
He was at the back end of the consensus board that we ran on like St. Patrick's Day that Austin mocked it. I think he was 99th. Dane, he's outside of your top 100. Is it similar to Scadaboo where he's just outside of your top 100? Like, where do you sit with Devin Neal from Kansas?
Yeah, I have a solid 4th-round grade on him. I like him as well. I think he's, so my comp, very different body types, but it reminded me a little bit of Kyron Williams, where it really shows it's a great example of the difference between throttling your speed is how it's more important than just sprinting speed for a running back, because that pacing that he brings is really impressive. He's got some wiggle to him. He has a knack for setting up defenders, and he did it consistently the last 4 years for an inconsistent Kansas offense, where he's averaging over 6 yards a carry consistently. So yeah, and I agree. He is can catch the ball in the backfield, swing routes, wheel routes. He was really productive. I think he catches the ball really cleanly outside of his frame. He protects the ball. Very few fumbles the last few years. He's durable. I mean, he does not miss games. So consistently, he's on the field getting the job done. So yeah, he's just a quality running back that I think you can plug in and he could be part of your mix.
What's keeping him from being a little bit higher than that to you? Just like a lack of high-end tools? You think the ceiling is fairly limited?
Yeah, I think he's like, even though he is the size that he is, then he can, like Derrik was saying, get out of some of those tackle attempts because of his size. I don't think he's a punishing runner. Like, I don't think he consistently attacks contact the way that he looks. So that's part of it. He's the long speed, like we talked about. There are times where pursuit will catch up to him and really kind of take things away. Sometimes he's overly patient at the line of scrimmage, where there are times where I wish he'd just be a little more aggressive attacking the line of scrimmage. The pass blocking, like we said, it's up and down. The Kansas State tape I can picture it in my mind right now of just how that was very up and down. So it's more things like that, where I don't think he has a true an out pitch. Like he doesn't have that one pitch he can go to that just to get anybody out, but he doesn't really have any deficiencies that make you say, okay, this guy is not going to make it at the next level. He's just a really well-rounded player.
Who's your answer here, Dane, for the guy that you are surprised is not getting more love in the process?
Who did I say? I think I said R.J. Harvey from UCF, who is in my top.
My guy.
Yeah, he's a former quarterback. He didn't play running back for the first time until he got to UCF. He transferred from Virginia. He was a quarterback growing up. Virginia signed him as a quarterback, and he decided to enter the portal, goes to UCF, and they say, listen, you can get on the field now if you're a running back. Let's make the change. He did it, and man, just watching him the last 2 years was a lot of fun. I thought he was going to be in last year's draft, so I had him queued up, all ready to go last year, goes back, actually has a better year, has over 1,500 yards, and he led FBS this year in the percentage of his carries that resulted in a 10-plus yard run, 23.3. So almost a quarter of his carries resulted in a gain of 10-plus yards. He's equal parts patient at the line, so he lets blockers do their job, but he can make these abrupt lateral cuts. He's very loose in his lower body. He's hopping from one gap to the other. His proximity to awareness is fantastic, so he can maneuver between all these spaces. You see the elusive burst where he's creating more than maybe he should or the average running back does. Spins out of tackle attempts. I think he has a foundation to be a solid pass catcher. To me, there's a lot to like about him, both bringing the juice, but then also being consistent with what you want from your running back.
I just love the stop-start ability. Like his ability to just make guys miss and throttle down is so incredibly impressive and set guys up in space. Like watching him reminded me a little bit of like watching Bucky Irving in space this year, where you just feel like the things slow down for him when he gets out into space. I was very impressed watching him. Derrik, when you watched Harvey, was there anything that gave you pause? Are you also a fan of him? Where do you sit with him?
I had an interesting experience with Harvey where both on the surface and then early in watching him, there's a lot of things that would lead me to not like this type of player typically. He's like 5'8", probably 205 on a very good day, so he's not a bigger guy. And I think you see that in the way that he runs. He's not very strong. I think he can lose contact balance pretty easily. Very bad pass protector. And I also think stylistically, I struggle with him sometimes because he loves to bounce and not just run forward. And I'm very much like I can be a boomer sometimes where I'll watch a running back and be like, man, just get downhill. That's why I love like Devin Neal. He'll just go. And so I struggled with Harvey, especially early on when I was watching him. But the more I watched him, the more I really did start to appreciate how good his stop-start ability is. Both, you see it a lot at the second level, but I also really started to appreciate it behind the line of scrimmage. Like when he does need to bounce and it's a good decision, he can bend a play all the way back to the other side of the field. And like when he makes the right call to do that, it really does look beautiful. Like when I was watching him, it was like a little bit of Tony Pollard-ish. And I know Pollard is a little bit bigger, but another player who, does he need to be bouncing as much as he does? I don't know, probably not. But when he does, it looks really, really good. And you're just hoping that he hits on those good calls more often than not. And he really is. I think the other thing too, when you're a smaller back, you have to show me long speed or I'm just going to be completely out. And Harvey does have that. He does have pretty good long speed. So typically not a player
40.
Yeah.
And 440, 90 percentile jumps. I mean, really the only reason his like RAS is a little bit lower is because he's a smaller player.
He's small.
But when you look at it, 15 plus yard runs, he had 32 of them this year, which was the second highest number in FBS. 6th nationally in missed tackles forced per attempt. So the speed is there, the home run hitting is there, and he's able to make guys miss. I really like him. He's a little bit undersized. I can understand why that might be where the reason he goes a little bit later, but just in terms of a guy who feels like he would be a monstrous pain in the ass to play against, he is the guy that jumped out to me when I was watching him 100%. Let's get a little bit deeper here into this class, Dane. Who is your favorite day 3 running back in this 2025 group?
So I originally had Devin Neal here, but since we talked about him, I will pivot to Jarquez Hunter, Auburn running back. Another guy that's in that could realistically have justified him late 3rd, but probably more of an early 4th round type of guy. Same tier as Scadaboo and right there with Neal. He's probably not going to go until day 3, but he's just. I mean, he's built really well. What did he weigh in at the combine? He was 5'09", 204. So he's another one that's a little bit shorter, but he's a little stocky. I mean, his muscles have muscles. I mean, he is like really ripped, and he runs like that. He runs with authority. He runs with just this tenacity that I think wears down a defense. And he doesn't. Nothing's cheap with him. If you don't get him to the ground, he's going to keep moving his feet through contact, and he will continue getting yards. So this past year in the SEC, averaged 6.4 yards per carry. Really productive year. I just every time I watched him, it was just consistently. And I'm thinking of the Kentucky game and that tape, and he was just consistently getting more than he should have. And those types of guys always stand out to me. The guys that get more than the average back, and I think he's one of them. He has a burst button when you give him a lane. He's a really the football character's off the charts with him, with the way he works, the way he prepares. That's something that his coaches really harp on with him. I think that he's not going to go until day 3, but a lot of the things that I look for in a back, he has them because he's physical, he's balanced. He 36.6% of his carries this year resulted in a first down or touchdown. That was number 2 in the FBS. So again, it's just production. It's a guy that likes to get north and south, keeps his legs pumping, and just goes and creates yards.
I'm looking at a picture of him right now. The size of his arms compared to his frame overall is just hilarious. He's like 74% bicep.
Yeah, he is. He's a ripped dude, and he's like talking to him. I can't remember where it was. Maybe it was a Senior Bowl, but he's like a cowboy. Like that's how he sees himself. Like he is a kind of a throwback with the way that he likes to play, and it's just he the vision, the tempo, maybe a little up and down sometimes, but he'll be a hammerhead, and he will just thrust himself into contact without gearing down. And he's not going to go down at contact because he will keep pumping his legs. And I think what helps him too is I think he can be a star in special teams as well. And so the type of back that you're not your number 1 on your depth chart, but 2 or 3 on your depth chart, you love to have this guy.
Who's your favorite day 3 guy that you watched, Derrik?
So this was one where I struggled with, not a little bit because I couldn't find a guy, but it was just, we have a few other categories here and I threw them into there. So I kind of would have rather saved them for that. I'll go to one that I actually liked his tape a few years ago, and then he kind of had a tumultuous couple of years, and he's now in the draft. But it's Raheem Sanders out of South Carolina. When he was at Arkansas, I really, really liked his tape. He was another guy who long speed wasn't great, but I think those first 15 yards, just his ability to play behind blocks, he was a really thick runner. He was just able to bounce off of guys. I think when you saw what he could do at his best back then, I think he looked really good. And so he's kind of had a tumultuous end to his college career. And I think he's not now the prospect that he was, but by the 6th round, this is absolutely a guy I would be willing to take and be like, we can maybe get 100 or so rugged carries out of him to be our innings eater. I think that's absolutely on the table.
Well, he's interesting because he was a receiver when he got to Arkansas, and then they transitioned him to running back. And so I think there's definitely a process there where he was just kind of going out and playing ball, and along the way learned how to be a better running back after he transferred, especially after he transferred to South Carolina this past year. But yeah, he is a bigger back, and he's sometimes too big. I mean, at one point he was over 250 pounds, so just keeping the weight down. And I actually like him best almost like in an H-back role where use him on wheels and pivots, and use him in different ways where he can, because he's a really good pass catcher. And so really tapping into that, I think is could be maybe the way for him to carve out a long-term role in the NFL.
Let's get to our next one here. Calling this the Bucky Irving Award for a player who might not go in the top 75, but we think can push for 1,000 yards in the right spot. Dane, I'll let you start this one off. Who is your candidate for the Bucky Irving Award in this draft?
I'm going to go with Trevor Etienne, Travis's little brother. I say little, but it's the way Trevor is built is much different than the way his brother is built. Trevor he's 200 pounds, but he's so short. He's only 5'8 3/4", so he's stockier, and so he looks a lot different than his brother. But it's just interesting when you compare the body types, because his older brother weighs more, but the body types just don't look very similar at all. Etienne, I think, is just he's a well-rounded back. I mean, I don't think there's anything about his game that is too once in a while he'll get a little too bounce happy, or at the second level, I wish maybe he were better at making a guy miss. There are things you can nitpick him about, but I think with a lot of the key traits you want in a running back, he has a lot of that. And this year, maybe the biggest knock against him was he was banged up quite a bit, especially this past year from Georgia. He was at Florida for 2 years, transferred to Georgia this past year, and he played in, I think, 10 games, but he was not 100% throughout most of the year. If he is healthy and he goes to a situation where he can get carries, I think he will make the most of those carries. He's very compactly built. I love the way that he pairs his eyes with his feet, and so he sets up his moves well. He's agile. His cuts are sharp. He can make those last-minute redirects where he's going to really tempo that defense. So I think there's a lot to like about him at the next level if he goes to a situation where he could get some regular carries.
Is there a team that you've had in mind for him in that range of the draft that you think would make sense that needs a player like that?
Cleveland was one that came to mind where, we kind of mentioned him with who were we talking about? Jordan
Jordan
James,
James, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like a similar where, more of a no nonsense guy, can grind out yards. I think that would make some sense.
Derrik, who is your Bucky Irving Award winner in this class?
This one, I feel like in the way that I had to frame it, if it's going to be a guy who comes in and gets 1,000 yards, he has to have some degree of explosive ability. And so when I was looking at some of the other guys that I was able to get into in the third, through fifth round and stuff like that, probably the best one who fits into that bucket for me is DJ Giddens from Kansas State. And there are actually a few things that I kind of struggle with about his game. I think there are times where he runs a little bit too upright, and I think he doesn't want to get down and run behind his pads. Like, he's a 215-pound back, and sometimes you watch him and you're like, kind of looks more like 195, but his top gear is really impressive. And I think he does do a good job of being a pretty explosive player. He's a pretty good pass catcher to me. There were moments where he was able to even down the field make some pretty impressive catches. I remember, I think it might have been against Cincy, he caught like a sail route. And I was like, okay, that's going to get some coaches to really love you if you have that sort of pass catching ability. So I think if you can get him into an offense that is, he's probably more limited to being a guy who is more of a zone runner because he is more upright, and you kind of need to just let him run outside zone, make the one cut and go. But I do think if you can get him into the right type of system like that, I do think that he could be a guy who could surprise a little bit.
Last one here, Dane. Let's call this the Gio Bernard Award for pass catching first backs. Maybe not second round picks like Gio Bernard was. I believe Gio Bernard was a second round pick, but a guy you feel like is a pass catching option first and foremost for these teams that you might be able to get a little bit later. Is there somebody in this class that fits that bill for you?
LeQuint Allen from Syracuse. He 64 catches last year, 119 over his 3 years at Syracuse. This is another guy that is ripped up, run strength, contact balance. I don't know that it has what it takes to be a lead back necessarily, but I would love this guy as a part of my backfield, change of pace guy, because I know what he brings as a pass catcher, and then he's also very good in pass protection as well. So as a third down guy, third down plus, because I think he could be more than just a third down player, but he catches the ball really naturally. I mean, he's got big hands. He catches outside his frame, has the Syracuse running back records actually for catches and receiving yards. So he's more than just a screen target. I mean, you can flex him across the formation, try to use him as a mismatch weapon. LeQuint Allen from Syracuse, I think, fits this perfectly.
How about you, Derrik? Your pass catching option in this class that you liked when you went back and watched everybody?
Kind of liked, at least for this role, Brashard Smith from SMU. And again, kind of like Dane said, not going to be a guy who is, a lead back type. He's 5'10", 196. Like, he's just not going to have that type of style. And even when you watch him as a runner, not a guy who bangs between the tackles and breaks off tackles, but they threw him a lot of passes last year. Like, he caught 39 passes out of the backfield for SMU. And a lot of them were kind of like check down stuff, but the quarterback play was not great at SMU, so you actually saw him make some really impressive catches, like outside of his frame, going up for it, kind of behind his back a little bit, making him stop his momentum, but still be able to gather it and go make plays yards after catch. So I think if a team needs a guy who can offer them a little bit of something out of the backfield in that respect, a little bit of explosive ability, I think Smith could probably check that box for a team.
Well, he was a receiver his first 3 years at Miami. He was kind of like the Tyrone Tracy.
That makes sense. Okay.
Where Tyrone Tracy was running back or a wide receiver at Iowa, and then he transfers to Purdue, becomes a running back, and it was the same thing with Brashard Smith at Miami, and then he transfers to SMU this past year. They turn him into more of a running back, but yeah, you still see that receiving ability outside of the backfield. He's just got a natural feel for it, and he can help you out on special teams as well. He was a kickoff return man, so as long as he's a big one where I think he's a guy that's going to be on a lot of visits, like 30 visits and all that, just because teams want to figure him out. The character is up and down, and that's something that teams have brought up with him. He was benched for the first half against Stanford this year because he missed a few team meetings and classes, things like that. But if you get this guy to really commit and focus and lock in, he's got all the talent to really be not like a difference maker, but a guy that can make an impact as a change of pace guy, as kind of like Tyrone Tracy did this last year as a rookie for the Giants.
Anybody that we have not mentioned, Dane, that you want your thoughts on the record as we're doing the running back show?
Well, we didn't mention Dylan Sampson from Tennessee. He was the only other running back that we didn't mention that's in my top 100. He's what he did this year in the SEC was pretty remarkable. He had almost 1,500 yards, average almost 6 yards per carry, going up against SEC defenses. He's another guy that's a little bit undersized. He's under 200 pounds, but he's got speed. Ran a 4.42 at the pro day. And he plays fast. So it's straight electricity when the ball's in his hands. So he's a lot of fun to watch. I think he's another one of those, if you're just looking for juice on offense, you look at him on day 2. I think he makes a lot of sense. I think we did a good job hitting on some of these day 3 guys. The few that we didn't, Ollie Gordon from Oklahoma State had such an amazing 2023 season, and then 2024 wasn't. And so teams are kind of trying to figure that out. Damian Martinez from Miami, big, bruising running back who is not going to rip off a lot of explosive runs. The speed's not going to blow you away, but he just continues to pound away. So, we could really talk for another hour about the running backs because there's just so many of these guys, which is kind of the whole point of this class, which, kind of makes it fun because the order these guys are drafted is not going to be what my order is or what your order is or anybody's order. It's just everyone's going to have their own little the guys they like, the guys that maybe fit them best in terms of what their strengths are. And so it's going to be fun on draft weekend to see the order they come off the board.
Well, you mentioned talking about guys drafted in the top 100 and the fact that we might not get to them all here. We are going to get to them on draft weekend because we are once again doing a live draft show coming to you guys this year from a studio in Chicago, Green Bay. Not a ton of studio space in Green Bay. Some people, when we mentioned that we weren't going to Green Bay, were like, oh man, you guys just don't want to go to Green Bay. I like my time in Green Bay. I would have been happy to go to Green Bay. We're trying to find a situation that makes sense for us. We are going to do it here, and we are going to be doing something very similar to what we've done over the last few years. We're going to be coming to you guys live on Thursday and Friday nights. Thursday night, it is going to be the 3 of us plus Bruce Feldman, which I'm very, very excited about. A legend, that man. I'm so pumped to have him be a part of what we're doing. And then on Saturday, still working that, or on Friday, still working that out. But we will be having another live draft show this year. So please be on the lookout for that. We will have plenty more details to come between now and when the draft kicks off. For now, that is all we've got. We will be back with the next mailbag on Monday. Appreciate you guys listening. We'll talk to you very soon. Thanks for watching the Athletic Football Show. Subscribe to the channel to keep up with us. Like and comment on this video, and we'll see you next time.